session is recorded.
Perfect. Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Aarti Khosla. For those of you I haven't met, I'm part of a network which is focused on climate action across the world. I also run and represent an initiative called Climate Trends, where our focus mainly is to talk to important influencers in both the public as well as the policy space and try and make room for decisions with respect to climate change. Sometimes I wear several different hats as well, and we have partners in the room with whom we have collaborated, and I welcome everybody. I do want to say that today's session is a meeting that came to our mind while chatting with Bitu over the last couple of weeks. And while all of us have something or the other to learn from Bitu and decades of work that has gone in, it also felt that while decisions on natural capital remain important, it also is a very important time just to take the kind of decisions which are needed on the economic front with respect to climate action. And I say this, simply because while the global discussions on climate change have become so loud and clear, it's also pretty evident that the way the business investment cycle runs, decisions that are taken now will last till 2040 or 2050. And which is why the hue and cry about getting it right at this moment is not a hue and cry alone, but it's actually based in an important window of time, which is an opportunity that is available. And pretty much today's session is a very, very small attempt to try and capture the thinking of most of you here who are spearheading a lot of important work. And while I speak, I also see Mr. Hemendra Kothari has joined us, and he's probably in a car, but thank you, sir, very much for joining this session. I will invite you very shortly, but let me just briefly say what the next 1 hour and 30 minutes are about. And like I said, there are a lot of feelers that are happening in the international community about how it's important this year to look at climate change. It's not just because US with Biden administration is now back into the Paris Agreement, or because China has put out a net zero target and the European Union has, but it's also pretty much because India's political thinking is quite aligned to assume a leadership position on climate. But having said that, it puts a lot of onus on other important players, especially business and industry, to be able to think through what such an alignment means should India's political thinking go towards taking economy-wide reductions in emissions by 2050, because essentially the road to 2050 will go through 2030 and 2040 and so forth. And that is what we wanted to discuss today. To lay the context, there is a short presentation of perceptions that we put together of about 400 small, medium, and large enterprises across Maharashtra, and I will go through them. We also have Daman, who's the director of the Carbon Disclosure Project in India, who will also he will offer complementarity to the presentation that I will make, just to offer you a perspective of where do we start talking about with respect to what is it that we are looking in terms of business and industry action. And I know that a lot of you have been in a lot of meetings discussing a lot of opportunities with respect to clean transport, clean energy, construction sector, real estate, and so forth. But this is an attempt to just try and bring things together in a certain manner, which is also digestible for a larger audience. I do want to acknowledge that while a lot of you are going to be speaking, this is a small session. It is not a public session, but we have some friends and colleagues who are from the community. There are colleagues from media organizations. I see there are colleagues from NDTV, Economic Times, Forbes, but also colleagues from our partners like WRI, the Climate Group, ASAR, Purpose, and a few others. I will pause right now. I welcome everybody. I will come back and make the presentation shortly, but I do want you to come in, Bitu, and add 2 words to complete what I said.
Arti, given the fact that we have people here on this session who are very familiar with this, we have Aditya, we have everybody, Rohit, we're all pretty familiar with the subject. And I think most of the people, including the attendees as well as the participants, will more or less know each other and they know the issue as well. So I won't go very far except to say that, look, essentially, our Sanctuary's partnership with Climate Trends has been based on something very straightforward. This is that the economy is actually, in truth, the wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. Now, this is a very bland statement. Everything is a subsidiary of that. The air we breathe, human rights, child rights, health, all this, the pandemic. So there is a natural, what you might call, there's a natural bond. And I don't think that we are in a situation where the old model of environmentalist fighting industry will survive, should survive, or can do any good any longer. There will be differences, but it is time for us to see that those issues on which we are agreed, whether it is the availability of water, whether it is the control of pandemics, whether it is the fact that we need power that does not accelerate climate change. This is basically why Sanctuary is part and parcel of what Climate Trends is doing, and I won't take any more time at all. I don't think there's any need for us to talk about Sanctuary and what its mission is. We know. I would like you, Aarti, to take charge and let's move forward at the earliest with no further banter. There we go.
Perfect. Thanks, Bitu. I will start with what I had to present, and allow me a second because the glitches always remain. Gunjan, do you mind sharing the presentation
Sure,
slide,
Aarti.
please? I'm sorry. And please put it in the present mode. Thank you very much. Well, like I started, I did talk about how much there is a need to do climate action at this moment, and which is why we are putting the discussion in this context. I just want to highlight a couple of things to ensure that we're all on the same page when we are talking about climate change. And I don't need to put out a lot of vital stats for India, but as the conversations have evolved over the last year or so, it is pretty evident that India sits in a very unique position, not simply because of its high vulnerability to climate change impacts, but also because of the fact that it's a large market. It's going to be the third largest economy and really the most populous country, and 7% of emissions coming from India in that respect make it quite a candidate where all eyes are on India, but also the domestic imperative of action remains very strong. At some point this year, we are told that there is going to be an analysis which will literally talk about the potential of economic loss from climate alone across the world to be shown as more than the losses in the worst historical economic recessions. So clearly, we are at a point where the cost of action versus the cost of inaction debate is pretty much done. Climate action is not merely to align with the political thinking of the country, it's also to be able to just align with profits, align with your own value chain, and align as well with what businesses see as growth and opportunity. I put a couple of things here which essentially talk about how there is an opportunity in terms of what the government is thinking, and if there are any alignments with what you all in the business and industry sector are also thinking. And of course, we are all aware, I don't want to underscore on that, but clearly the government has set a very ambitious target of 450 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030. The fact is that even with this amount of renewables, coal will still continue to be in the mix till 2040 and till a little later. It's also true that even if the government will announce a network, a countrywide net zero emissions reduction, which is either carbon neutral or emissions neutral, it will mean radical change in technology and policy and political shifts, not just in India, but across the world. And quite noteworthy to keep in mind that oil, gas, and biomass are really the three fuels that meet 80% of India's energy demand at the moment. And its energy use itself has doubled since the year 2000. Business and industry will need to reduce carbon emissions to avoid climate risk, and that's the context in which we are talking about at the moment. Uh, Whenever there is a discussion of net zero emissions, either it is a very blanket statement, which is a political statement of intent, but if we parse it a little more, it's pretty clear that it sets an extremely high bar of ambition in terms of what business and industry are required to do, simply because of the contribution of business and industry to emissions. And as you see, just more than half of the emissions for the country come from power sector and transport sector alone. And should India take net zero, it will mean a complete overhauling, for instance, of the electricity sector and as well the peak coal demand. Going forward, it's also, I think, quite evident that there are certain sectors like cement and steel, which consume a lot of energy, but which are also very hard to abate sectors. So if there is any kind of paradigm shift that is needed towards low carbon dioxide production or circular economy, or procuring supply chains and value chains which are driven by cleaner systems, then it means a lot of change at the level of the business and industry. And pretty much that calls for an absolutely dramatic transformation, especially in the hard to abate sectors. And clearly, the role of coal here is becoming pretty evident, because across the world, as you see, there is reduced sentiment for coal at the moment, and coal is really no longer the king, so to say, especially with the way the renewables have replaced coal in the electricity sector. And simply because of the fact that coal also remains pretty fundamental and central to how the industry sector will seek its energy from, and what that shift will mean. I just wanted to, double down on that point of the nexus between coal and the electricity sector, and the transformation in the energy sector that is needed, so to speak. To put all of this in some kind of a realistic context, and what makes sense, how do I say, just something that makes sense in the context of, something that we can gather. We administered a survey to about 300 to 400 small, medium, and large enterprises across Maharashtra. And the reason to do that was also because last year was so consequential that not just more than half of the industry sector was just course correcting or taking another look at their strategy, but all of them were also set back just because of the global pandemic situation. And no need to go into that detail here. But the survey that we undertook essentially was to get the insights of the industry on what do they think about the direct and indirect impacts and risks of climate change to their business. How much do they think they are prepared to address the risks? What do they think is the adequacy of action that they are taking? And what support do they think that they really need from the government? And what you see on the slide here is the kind of sectors that we reached out to. So about 10-15% of respondents were from the financial services and the insurance sector. Another 10% were from the software and IT sector. And I think a combination of 10 to 12% came from the retail, healthcare, and the auto sector. And likewise, there were also other sectors, even, for example, beverages or textiles, which are extremely energy intensive, but also sectors where a lot of industry does exist in the state of Maharashtra. And needless to say, that was done with facts on how the state of Maharashtra is highly vulnerable to climate change. And again, I don't want to go into details here, but there are very alive realities of droughts, as well as temperature rise, even long-term effects like sea level rise, and how the Mumbai metropolitan region could be impacted in the next couple of years. And these are not small things, but when situated in the context of how things could actually look different over a decade or so, the survey indeed revealed some kind of results which we thought were more awareness of the industry sector than what one would imagine, so to speak. So as you see here, not surprising that 70% of industry really did believe that climate change is real, but also in terms of where they thought the impact was most. More than half of the people said that it was their profits, it was their supply chain, and also it was their expenditure, which was getting impacted by climate change. So they were not talking about just implications in terms of long-term impacts, but those are implications on their books and profits and expenditures and value chain, supply chain, which really shows that the impact is real and now. almost 6 out of 10 respondents also actually said that their top priority was de-risking their business from climate impacts, which in our view is quite significant, given the understanding of climate and the ability to take action is not an immediate decision, so to say, sometimes for senior managers. And one point is missing here, but it was also quite interesting that especially in the technology, the IT sector, 5 out of 10 managers said that the health of their workers and the health of their employees, which gets affected due to climate impacts, or not being able to come to work due to a flood, or an incessant flash flood or rain, is also something which affected their day-to-day outputs quite significantly. And not surprisingly, heavy rainfall, just the clear perceptible impacts of climate, for example, rainfall, floods, water shortage, increased temperature, are the kind of things which were really seen as the main threats. Next slide, please. Just in terms of when we asked people on what they thought were solutions, this again is not surprising. I don't want to spend too much time, because an audience that you all are, I think this comes as a no-brainer. But clearly there was a lot of recognition of everything that needs to be done in terms of low carbon dioxide production, enabling a circular economy, shifting towards renewable energy, getting clean electricity access, getting clean production of input and material, and making sure that the infrastructure itself is low carbon in and of itself. And but one thing to note is quite important, that all of this big acknowledgement was very clear and concise in large industries, and it felt that the small and medium were still not so aware of the risks and the level of preparedness that must be necessary to address those risks. And pretty much, I think here we are, in that sense. And that's what I wanted to present, that while the big picture in terms of the international geopolitics is quite rosy, which talks about India's sustainable development paradigms and its ability to take network across the board wide emission cuts, it just feels that on the ground and in terms of realities, there is still a very long road to travel. And the question really is, what is that long road to travel, which my next slide explains. And that is what I want to put out for discussion, because clearly across the world, if net zero is the North Star of climate action, and all countries, businesses, corporations, the financial sector, states and cities are coming out with their plans of how they think their carbon emissions will become net zero, I think some of you here more than me will realize how that is a catch, both not just in zero, but in net as well. And sometimes net is about, the whole system of being able to buy credits and continue to pollute to a certain degree, and yet be able to offset your emissions, which is a large part of net in a way. But the domestic paradigms are quite different. The situations with respect to India's water scarcity, how the top 10 cities, the most polluted in the world, are mostly Indian. And needless to say, how, for instance, our natural capital is being impacted. It feels that while the international negotiations have a certain need to get net zero, the domestic imperatives of action are not just very deep rooted, but they're also very difficult to crack. And these are the kind of things I think we wanted to talk about here, uh, essentially on how do we talk about what needs to be done, what do we consider, how do we make it real, and what can business and industry do. And I still wanted to leave Gunjan with the last slide, which please do show that. It's not very important, but I think that's what is the fundamental, uh, the the very last slide, which basically says every action matters, every degree matters, every choice matters, and every bit of warming matters, which is why we are talking about this, and which is why we thought, as India warms up, whether at G7 or at the Biden Climate Summit or at the International India-EU Summit, at one of these key international moments, India will possibly come ahead and make an extreme statement of vision and ambition. We just wanted to warm up as well with some of the stakeholders here on what your perceptions are. on what needs to happen. Sorry if this was both grim as well as stuff that you were already aware about, but I just thought that we will present these findings, and I will now invite Daman as well to talk a little bit. I know we might have comments here, but Bitu, if it is all right, we can open the floor slightly later.
Yeah. Arti, Rohit had mentioned that Rohit Bansal had mentioned that he had to go. He's very kindly agreed to stay on another 15
Sure.
minutes. So if Daman takes 5-7 minutes to just outline this, then I'd love to hear from Rohit as well, and then Hemendra Bhai and so on, and then we'll move on.
Sure, I'm ready. Gunjan, if you can just upload the presentation. Thanks, Aarti and Bittu for inviting me, and it's a great honor and privilege to be part of this group. And our study, which we released a report just a couple of weeks ago, actually complements on what you're doing. And what I'd just like to say that it was called on March 3rd was released that India demonstrates climate action, but there is definitely need for more. Next one, please, Gunjan. So it's essentially that we're talking about COVID, and we've seen the impact of COVID, where India's GDP growth actually fell down by nearly 24% and so on. But we really don't know the big wave of climate change that's coming, and the frightening part is that there is no vaccine for it. So it is the vaccine against climate change action is all our actions, as Aarti also mentioned. And here is a headline that we got in one of the papers, and was also covered in Bloomberg, that Indian companies, the ones that are reporting to CDP, then this I'm talking about 67 of the top 200 on the stock exchange, as well as another 150 odd in the supply chain. But this figure is actually just from the top ones that says that they're reporting a loss of nearly equivalent of $100 billion. And 87% of that is only from 4 banks. But the good thing is that they're also saying that there is an opportunity of nearly half that amount to be gained if they take action on climate change. Next one, please. This is just a snapshot of the report. Next one. So essentially what it shows is actually that, these results are far more striking than your survey. And these are companies that we've been named, we scored them, we ranked them, that 99% of the companies responding have board level oversight, and that they're taking action year on year. And the other chart, which is it's essentially that 88% have incentives to management. Like for instance, Wipro's CEO's pay is actually linked, the variable segment has a component that's linked to its climate change performance. So we have other such instances where companies are actually working in these financial incentives for their management to take action on climate change. Next one, please. These are the risks that companies are saying. And 62 of the 67 have identified climate-related risks. And most of it is, of course, no surprise, is from current regulation, and also acute physical risks that they face. I mean, this mirrors what you're saying. Aarti, next one, please. So, and this represents what I mentioned, the climate risks that companies are reporting. As I said, about $100 billion, 714 lakh crores. And this is the financial part of it is 87% of it. And of course, transportation is the next one. So next one, please. Different sectors. The opportunities, as I mentioned, there are 42 companies that are also reporting opportunities that they have, from resource efficiency, from newer products and services that can come into the market, from energy sources and other aspects. I'd be happy to share more details if people are interested. A lot of them are listed in our report that we can discuss. Next one, please. So on the water-related risk also, we had last year 28 companies respond on water. Water is actually rising to the top of a lot of concern. The year before, it was only 15 companies responding on water, and the water-related risk is companies are reporting at over 20,405 crores. The interesting part is that we also asked them what would be the cost of action on that, and that is only 820 crores. So actually, if they acted on those risks and took action on water, there would be the cost of inaction actually comes to about 25 times that, if you're not acting on water. So more and more companies are taking action on water and want to do work on that. And related to that is, of course, regulation, as you mentioned, that even in climate change now with net zero talk and so on, and even here, and the Prime Minister has put water as one of the priorities, and Niti Aayog is working on it. But 71% feel that there will be newer regulation that's coming in and impacting their businesses. Next one, please. I'm just rushing through these and I'd be happy to discuss those. Now, what can companies do on this? And what is the action that we're taking? And we're discussing with a lot of the companies here, some colleagues that are here and also some of the others. And also what is known as the hard to abate sectors, the sectors that emit the most. And of the 67 that have responded, 22 companies were from the hard to abate sectors, chemical, cement, steel, etc. 47% of the total emissions are actually from the hard to abate sector. Cement sector accounts for nearly a third, followed by iron and steel. Next one, please. And so this is, and we, along with WRI, some of the partners that are here, WWF and UN Global Compact, have come up with a program called Science-Based Targets. These are special programs that have been developed from the learnings of the companies that have responded to CDP. Last year, nearly 10,000 companies responded to CDP globally, representing over half of the world's market cap. So what is it that they're doing? What distinguishes CDP is that not only we ask companies what you've done in the last year, but what do you propose to do next? Science-Based Targets is a methodology that we came up with 3 other partner NGOs that actually maps and creates a pathway for companies to become Paris compliant based on their sectors. So what are they doing? For instance, we're happy to report we worked with Ultratech and did their emission modeling, and they have now taken a Science-Based Targets emission modeling program, and they are now on the pathway, so they can say that they are Paris compliant. They have short-term targets, they have medium-term targets, they have long-term targets. We're working with Dalmia Cement, we're working with we've done the same for Tata Chemicals and so on. So we're happy to report that this says 51, but just today I was told that 55 Indian companies that have committed to science-based targets, and we're working with a few others that is in the process. And I'm having calls almost daily and on all these things. The benefit of this is actually globally, we did an evaluation last year that of the 700 companies that reported through CDP on their science-based targets, and the analysis of half of those actually shows that their emission have reduced by 25% since 2015, which is actually at a rate that is higher than what is needed for the warming of 1.5 degrees. So this points to gives evidence, for instance, India to take a net zero target, because you have a North Star, as Aarti mentioned, that you then have an incentive to work towards these targets, and there will be more and more pressure or movement towards companies moving on those. Next one, please. I think this is the last one. Yeah, and so, this is just, the minister mentioned science-based targets and carbon disclosure project in his speech at the UN Secretary General's Climate Summit in 2019. 4 years ago, when I went to the ministry, the additional secretary, the joint secretary threw me out of the room saying that they don't want issues like carbon pricing and science-based targets raised. They don't want prescriptive norms. But because we were able to collect this data and show to the government that this is the action that industry is taking, which will help them achieve their targets, so much so that the data, CDP's data, is now being used in government's filings to UN, as well as the minister mentioned it in his speech at the UN. So I'll end my points with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Daman. That was really, Aarti, I think that was between what Climate Trends has done and what Daman has put. It paints a picture which is not all grim. It paints a real picture, but there is something we can do about it.
Yeah, just one last point, Bittu, and also because Hemendra Bhai is here, what we want to do, and this year also organize an event on investors, what investors are doing globally and what investors are looking for India, because for India's net zero target and infrastructure development, we will need a lot more money, and a lot more money is coming into ESG sectors. And we would want to, see more action from Indian investors in that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Daman. Bittu, I'm slightly conscious of time, and while I would have really, I want to invite Mr. Kothari, but if that's okay, is it all right to let Rohit speak because he took out time?
Rohit says that he's being yanked out of this place within the next 5-7 minutes. So, Hemendra bhai, let's hear what my dear friend Rohit has to say, and then after that we would like to move to you, and then we can go through the rest of the program. Is that all right?
Okay, all right. Okay, fine.
Thank you.
It's a privilege to speak after Daman and now before him and by. So, I mean, I'm kind of maybe providing some comic relief here. But suffice to say, I just have one single line, if you can remember just one submission, that at one level, we are preaching to the converted. We are talking at the very high level, and talking to governments, in my limited experience here, has been much easier if the people at the retail level, at the consumer level, at the citizen level are somewhere projected as being aware and being involved. The same civil servant would make Daman and people like me sit down if he knows that minister ki constituency se pressure aa raha hai. And what is the pressure here is fairly simple. We have a deep need for retail communication. That's probably taking the subject to my area of interest, but retail communication, making people think that it's good for me, not necessarily assuming that people know how to articulate what they are feeling. Fasal hamari is baar utni nahi hui. The tree outside my home, which has semal, today there is no semal flower on it this year. It has gone well before Holi. So how is how a simple thing will not happen as we are used to every year. The name and shame could be the third idea, which is essentially giving name. But yeah, at some point of time, people don't just think of this as a good thing to do, but also there is some penalty involved in it if we don't. And of course, one project linked to policy and outcomes. So if it is dredging of dams and rivers, which Bittu and I sometimes discuss, then this meeting should be a kind of a launch pad for a very specific project. So we are talking of retail communication. We are talking of good for me for 1 billion people. We're talking of name and shame at the middle tier among industry. And we are talking of one single project which can possibly be in Maharashtra and has the support of the relevant stakeholders to make it a marquee for others to pick up the thread. The consequence of what I'm saying is fairly obvious, but the bedrock of what I'm submitting here, Gunjan, Bittu, Himen Bhai, and all others here, Naman, is that the WhatsApp economy, for example, illustratively, is the most popular way in which people are doing business. I could throw stuff like 65 billion messages and 2 billion a day and those sorts of things. The number of minutes that people are spending is obvious enough. The older people are spending sometimes much more than even younger people. So I think critically there is a case for looking at one project, one message which ricochets around the WhatsApp economy, which tends to, just for the pure illustration purposes, could be easily forwardable. It pushes us into thinking, why would somebody push this in an alumni group, in a family group? Is it that we are limited just to jokes? Are people unable to be interested in the climate change discussion? Do we need to make it simpler and more engaging and get in some